Thank you, Joe. Morning, everybody. Good to see all you folks that apparently don't have anything better to do at 7:30 in the morning than come and listen to me. I appreciate that. Let's see. First of all, let's talk about me just a second. I always make this clear so you'll know my viewpoints of where I'm coming from. I'm a libertarian type conservative that normally votes Republican, so there it is, it's out there. I would prefer that there's a lot to cover, so I prefer we save questions till the end. If you have that absolute burning desire, I guess I get that, but I'd prefer it to be done that way. Let's start with the 2016 legislative session. We'll do that, and then the U.S. presidential primary that's going on, all of them, and then finally the presidential general election. Like I say, questions later, please. The legislative session, first of all, methodology. How did I kind of put together my facts on all of this? Well, as you might expect, talk to some lobbyists, talk to some legislators, check with some other sources around the Capitol, and I think I have at least a reasonable take on it. First, I'm going to talk about the budget in general, what it looks like this year. Then some ballot issues that maybe have enough legs to get some traction. And then finally, the University of Missouri and its travails the last year or so and what that means as far as its budget that's coming. So what are we likely to see in that regard? And I'll tell you right now, it ain't pretty. Anyway, budgets and general bills. Usually you don't get much done during an election year. I'm not so sure this is going to be true this year. We'll see. What do I see happening as far as just general budgets, laws, et cetera, for the state of Missouri? Well, I think we may finally get an ethics bill this year. It would be mostly on stopping the revolving door, or at least making it a little harder so legislators can't turn around and then become lobbyists almost instantly. A gift ban from lobbyists, there is none whatsoever right now. I don't know that contribution limits are going to change. There's some talk about it. The sticking point is the bill offered by the Democrats has limitations for individuals, but not for labor unions. So I don't think that one's going to get a whole lot of traction. I do think that this is a bigger problem than most people realize. I'm told that every single lunch where a committee meets at the legislature now, every single one is paid for by a lobbyist. And it's sort of expected, and that bothers me. I suspect it bothers you. And so that's why I'm hoping that something's done on the gift, the whole lobbyist gift area. Transportation. We have I-70, which is slowly turning into a gravel parking lot, at least below the surface. We have 10,000 bridges. We have 34,000 miles of roads. And there may be a modest amount of effort and change in that regard that they can do without a vote, in other words, avoiding the Hancock Amendment. But it won't raise very much money. It's only about a 1.5 cent gas tax increase. A lot of industry and associations are for it. That may make it, but the big issue, all that other stuff I talked about where we have a growing crisis in transportation, I think it just hasn't gotten bad enough yet that people are willing to step up and either use tolls or higher gas taxes, even in an era of low gas prices, which are probably going to be with us for a while. So I'm very, very modestly optimistic that our transportation woes, particularly the obvious problems with I-70, both on the level of traffic and the condition of that interstate, will be fixed. I just don't think we can get it done this year. Abortion, there will be a bill to make sure that MU stays out of that business. It may actually be the law already from a 1987 law, but this legislature is pretty red, pretty conservative, and they're pretty serious about that. Anyway, so I think something will be done there. I was going to say that there was going to be at very least a sense of the Senate, sense of the House against building a stadium in St. Louis. Now I'm not so sure that's an issue. Although it still annoys me that we taxpayers owe about $120 million in debt that we are paying about 15 to 16 million a year on for the existing stadium in St. Louis. I find that a little hard to take. I think we may end up with a concealed carry on campus law. Those are sweeping the country. I don't know how many states have them now, but it's likely, and I'm sure our campus liberals will really have some real difficulty with that, but there's a good chance that's going to happen. Now, the state budget, what's it look like? Well, as we go into this session, the revenues over budget are about $337 million. That's pretty good news, except not really, and here's why. There's a provision in the law called the supplementary budget, and that means that in about this time of year, the governor can offer up an additional budget. And what happens is every year, I think all governors do this, Nixon wants a $350 million supplemental budget, and which includes, by the way, $200 million of Medicaid spending. In other words, it doesn't find its way into the regular budget, but thanks to organic growth, just by the standards and the law, our Medicaid rolls are expanding to the tune of $200 million in the last year. It's got to be paid for. So suddenly that $337 million kitty that I talked about is, shall we say, greatly diminished and maybe non-existent because of other needs. And I've said for a long time, the more you grow Medicaid, if you don't have enough revenues, and we'll talk about that in a minute, there's only one place it's really going to come from, and that's education. There's no room anywhere else. And so here we go with, we didn't even pass the Medicaid expansion from Obamacare, if you'll recall, but this is organic growth, and that extra money that everybody thought was going to be there is largely eaten up by that. I guess there are other possible statutory things that could occur, but those are the big ones. Now, what's not being done is really disappointing to me. What's not being done has to do with economic growth. Now, think about it. I believe economic growth of a state is the single most important thing everybody ought to be striving to achieve. The more you grow, the faster your growth rate, the more ultimately you can invest in you'll have extra taxes, you can invest in infrastructure, you can actually have, you can better pay for your universities, your K-12, et cetera. Sorry to say, and Joe Hasluck might have the numbers, but in the last 17 to 18 years, Missouri has ranked somewhere between 45th and 50th in GDP growth compared to all the other states. Pretty close, Joe? Pretty close. And in the last year or two, we trail every one of our adjacent states, every single one, even sad sack Illinois, which is basically broke, and of course Kansas, which everybody loves to say is going to fall apart, but is actually doing a lot better than a lot of our friends want to admit. I think it's because of bad policies, and yet here I am telling you, I don't see anything going on this session to change those policies. There's no effort of consequence to switch from a fairly high state income tax to a consumption tax. Nothing's being done on right to work. Nothing's being done on tax credit reform. I already said much is being done on transportation. There may be a smidgen of education reform efforts such as choice and charters, stuff like education savings accounts, maybe. Maybe that process will get started. Nothing in legal reform, nothing in prevailing wage. So after going through all the things that I see happening, it seems only fair to point out all these things that I don't see happening, which is probably going to leave us as another slacker state when it comes to economic growth, which only happens to be the most important thing we ought to be trying to do. Ballot issues. I think these are the ones that I think have some legs and have a chance not only to get on the ballot, but actually get passed. Medical marijuana. There's a serious effort going on right now in that regard. If it's not too broadly written and doesn't look like an escape hatch to legalize marijuana entirely, the legislature might let that one go. If they think it's too broad, they may try to write one of their own. Campaign finance reform, maybe. Once again, this may be a Democratic initiative to try to limit individuals but not unions, in which case we'll see a pretty good fight over that. But, you know, they might be able to get it on anyway. Missouri Promise, I thought that was dead. There may be a little bit of life to that. Remember now, that's the raise of the cigarette tax that Tim Wolf, former President Wolf, got behind. There was a recent $1 million addition to that campaign from R.J. Reynolds to give it some life, so maybe there's something to it. Okay, let's go to the University of Missouri. First, I want to mention that anybody out there, if you're a real sensitive person, real progressive, a college student, I may say some challenging things. MU has a little book on exclusive terminology to use so that we can have a proper amount of diversity. And I might end up being guilty of adultism here, which is defined in that. So, in other words, I'm just saying that I'm hereby formally declaring this room to be an unsafe space. And you all should stay at your own risk. Anyway, getting back to this year, the University of Missouri and the budget, I think the subtitle of that would be, I even wrote it down, Old Mizzou's asked for it for years, and this is the year it's going to get it. Sorry to say. So let's go and talk about why. And it's a pretty sorry state of affairs. It turns out, as I did all my interviewing of people for this, I was astounded to find out that the university, through its high officials, its lobbying people, this is almost a direct quote, has almost zero relationships with the state legislators, which, you know, if this campus is getting roughly $240 million a year from the legislature, don't you think you'd like to develop a pretty good working relationship on a regular basis? That just seems pretty elementary to me, but it's true. And it's really, really damaging the university right now. Anyway, that's the starting point. I don't think there was that great of a relationship anyway with particularly some of the more rural red area people who looked at a lot of the university folks up here for over the years as being a little bit arrogant and elitist and just ordering everybody to, you know, this is the money we need this year, we want it, thank you. Then in the last year, look at all the stuff that happened. Racial issues, concerned students 1950, racist university. Not true, but there you are. The football team threatening to go on strike. People that get a scholarship to play, but they say they'll take the scholarship, but they're not going to play unless the president is fired. And then in an astounding fashion, the football coach and the athletic director get behind them rather than being part of management, which is what I thought they were. It's not too hard to figure out they're part of management. That didn't go down so well. The Planned Parenthood imbroglio, not sure university legally should have been doing what they were doing anyway, but that didn't go down well. The med school dean gets fired, and even today, I'm not 100% sure a lot of people know why. The graduate student fiasco. How would you like to be a graduate student and find out with less than 24 hours notice that you don't have health insurance the next day, particularly if you're pregnant and about to deliver a baby? And there are other issues there. So that's how you get a union, by the way, which is probably what they're going to do. Tim Wolf resigns as president. Chancellor Lofton is fired, but not to worry. He has a very generous severance package. He'll be fine, and that didn't go down too well either, that big pay package. 51% of tenured faculty have a waiver from teaching. That doesn't go down too well, although, you know, I'll defend academic freedom every day. Maybe they're all justified. I kind of have my doubts, but you can imagine how that goes down. 8 vacancies, 8 interim people, so it looks like a time of transition, and people aren't real happy about all of that. And of course, there's our favorite, Assistant Professor Melissa Click and Associate Director of Student Life, Jana Basler, who tried to deny journalism students their First Amendment rights of free assembly, and perhaps committed a third-degree assault. That prompted a letter from the House and Senate, virtually every Republican signed. Counter letter from the faculty defending them. Fairly dumb in my view, but that's their right. Then we find out that they're also annoyed that her research deals with Lady Gaga and 50 Shades of Grey. Might be worthwhile, but I guess I could be convinced of that, but you can imagine how that all goes down. Anyway, it all looks like a perfect storm, a lack of leadership everywhere, and just terrible. Where do we end up with something like that? Well, what do we achieve nationwide? I think you could really make the case that Mizzou nationwide, there's three things that you look at. A, we're a systemically racist campus, college, university. Not true, but a lot of people would think that based on the coverage. Secondly, we're a laughing stock. That's always a good one to have. And finally, the face of the university isn't Truman the Tiger anymore, it's Melissa Click. So that's where we are before the budget talks even start, in my opinion. That's the perfect storm that MU has to overcome. Like I say, the total budget for the university is about $482 million, with about $94 million last year in capital projects. Half of that comes here, $240 million or thereabouts. My prediction is that the House, you remember now, budgets start in the House, then they go to the Senate. The House will recommend probably zero. I know that's shocking. You have no idea the level of anger of legislators across the state about this. And so the real question is, if the recommendation is zero, what's the Senate going to do? Kurt Schaefer's there as head of appropriations. Will they be able to add back everything? Do they want to add back everything? I wouldn't be surprised if the university isn't down $20 to $40 million by the time the final budget's done, just as we're getting your attention type message. And I don't like that sort of thing, but I guess I sort of understand it. Tie that also, don't forget, enrollment looks to be going down, and giving and donations are going down. So this is an absolute catastrophe, in my opinion. A lot of people, I'm telling you, a lot of these legislators are going to take the attitude that, you know, I don't live down in southwest Missouri. We got a couple of really great places down there, Missouri Southern, Missouri State, et cetera. Why am I going to keep sending all that money up to Mizzou when they obviously don't share my values and my people's values? We got nice places down there. So we want to support higher ed. We just want to support it down there rather than up there, et cetera. And I'm not saying I agree with that, but I'm just saying I can just see that an issue. Anyway, it's going to be a dreadful session for the university from a budget standpoint. It's a real question of how bad it's going to get hurt. Other special legislation that I think come in the university's way, non-teaching tenured faculty, that 51% kind of got people. There may be a bill to limit that to 10% and then only for 1 year. There may be a bill to elect the board of curators with, you know, special guidelines, et cetera. Bills requiring English proficiency to teach, make the MU logo public. That's a big deal, I'm not sure. And the big issue of productivity and efficiency. It's really more what I would call accountability and looking. A whole bunch of academics I've noticed have two central views about what they do. A, more money equals more quality. Just give us more money, we'll get better and better. More money, more quality. B, your search for accountability is an assault on our academic freedom. In my view, both those are false. And after the events of the last year, it looks to me like the legislature is collectively saying enough. We are going to look a lot more intrusively as to how you operate, because it's pretty obvious things aren't going real well under your theory of operation. Maybe that's a little harsh, but I can tell you that's the attitude. I want to finish on this section with a couple of things. Kind of a sobering thought. In past years, we've always had a local delegation friend in a key spot. For the last 5 years, we've had Kurt Schaefer, frankly, saving the university a lot of money, adding a lot of money. He'll be gone next year. Prior to that, we had Chris Kelly as budget chair in the House. He protected us. Prior to that, we had Roger Wilson as Senate Appropriations Chair. Starting next year, starting in the next session, we have nobody. We're not going to have a House Budget Chair or a Senate Appropriations Chair. So to me, it's going to get a little harder when we don't have that key person there, and I don't think anybody ought to look forward to that. I guess I have a kind of a scary feeling that we're really on our way to becoming kind of an average non-AAU university. That's why it's so critical for us to get some good leadership going forward at the university, whether it's at the Board of Curators level, the presidential level, the chancellor level, and frankly from all of us in this community that love the university and want it to be great and be a first-class research institution, a quality AAU university. I think there's real peril right there. I wish I was more upbeat, but that's the session. You asked me to talk about the session, that's what I see coming. It's not, I don't think it's going to be very pretty. Okay, my second big topic, the 2016 presidential election. None of us have ever seen anything quite like what's unfolding now. And I think we're going to be able to say that all the rest of the way till the November election. So what's going on? What in the world has got all this stuff going on? Well, first of all, let's see where we are as a country. You can see the dissatisfaction, the concern. Since 2009, individual household income is actually down $1,500. The rich are getting richer, the poor seem to be getting poorer. Poverty rates are worse. Big cities are blighted and crime-ridden. We have 2% GDP growth rate over the last several years, worst post-recession recovery ever, or since the World War II. We all feel kind of powerless against an out-of-control administrative state. Trust in government is at an all-time low. We're fractured and divided politically more than any time, at least that I can remember in recent years. And people seem to be rather angry and depressed. Only 23% of the population thinks the country's moving in the right direction. Polls show that in the last 2 years, for the first time ever, people think that government is the big problem, not the economy, the big issue. It's fear of government. Didn't used to be that way. One of the best people I've ever seen to write on stuff like this is Peggy Noonan. She writes for Wall Street Journal and others. You know, what's the explanation for how people feel right now? And she writes, and I'm quoting, "What's going on is that the average American voters are surveying the past 15 years. At home, they see an economic near collapse, followed by a feeble recovery, a culture that grows every day, grosser and more bizarre, falling educational results, a bigger, more demanding, and more corrupt federal government. In the world, 2 unwon wars, ISIS, a refugee crisis greater than any since World War II, Putin on the rise, American clout and prestige on the decline, and they think, who gave us this world? The pros gave us this world. They conclude maybe individuals with attainments outside the political world are the ones we ought to be looking at, etc." I think you get the point of what she's trying to say. So I look at this as kind of part of what's going on is a revolt against the establishment, as Peggy Noonan would say, the folks that gave us this world. And I think both parties are unhappy with the establishment. Bernie Sanders is a socialist, and he's given Hillary Clinton all she can ask for in that. And then you have the Republicans. The base gave the Republicans a big victory in 2010 and again in 2014. And if you're a member of the base, you're conservative, you're Tea Party, you're just an average conservative voter, got these big wins, what do you got to show for it? Well, it looks to me like the people, they're going to feel like the people are taking care of the donor class, but not others. They're not dealing with immigration like they promised because they want to make sure big corporations have some cheap labor. A lot of cronyism, like the Export-Import Bank, the classic crony capitalist model. Still looks like Harry Reid's running the Senate to a lot of people. Looks like all these folks did a heck of a lot less than they could have or said they would, et cetera. So we have a lot of revolt of the rank and file and a revolt of the Tea Party folks also. So no wonder the anti-establishment folks like Donald Trump, Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, Ted Cruz, I'm including him in that since he's loathed by the Washington establishment, they poll around 60% or thereabouts. This is the anti-establishment wave is what's really going on. Now, the Republican primary, let's take a look at that. And also a guy named Donald J. Trump. Like I said, nothing remotely we've seen like it before. The establishment folks are scared to death. My prediction, the Republican nominee, you know, I'm really going out on a limb on this one, will either be Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, or Marco Rubio. We'll get back to all that later. I sort of think it's neck and neck. I sort of think that Ted Cruz will win the Iowa caucuses. I sort of think Donald Trump will win the New Hampshire primary. But polling is so bad these days, it's really hard to know. You're not going to know a lot till you really get there. And the real action is later when we get to Super Tuesday and all those big states in the South and Midwest, et cetera, in March and April. Then you'll start winnowing the field. Can Donald Trump be the nominee? Yes, particularly if he picks up support when others drop out. And there's a new, the establishment always thought that as others drop out, their support will go to other people like Marco Rubio. But there's a new poll out that shows that's not true. So Donald Trump's been running 30, 35, 36% in the generic poll. But if you take it out, take everybody else except those three people, he zooms up to 45 to 48%. So he would pick up, theoretically, those other people. And that tells me he can win this thing. He can win a lot of primaries. So love him or hate him, I think he has a chance to win this thing. Now, the Donald Trump phenomenon. To sum it up, I think he is the fault of the GOP establishment that basically didn't tell the truth to conservatives and refused to do what it promised on, like I said, immigration, illegal aliens, committing crimes, sanctuary cities, Obamacare, religious liberty like the Little Sisters of the Poor, crony capitalism, didn't even seem to try. Not too concerned about bringing in thousands of people from Syria without vetting them properly. So there's Trump. Who are his supporters? Well, a lot of it are the white working class, a lot of people with a high school education, but some more advanced. 40 to 54 years old, economic insecurity everywhere, loss of faith in experts in the future, really. They feel like they're getting shafted by environmentalists and don't get to work on the Keystone Pipeline or coal mines, et cetera. And it's not just Republicans. He's attracting a lot of people from independents or others. They just want to take their country back. So they see his positions on immigration and protecting wages, trade deals as a good thing, and they like it. Same with Muslim fears, and his comments about how nobody gets in until we figure out a way to vet them. Turns out after Cologne and the other things that happened in Germany and elsewhere on New Year's Eve is nothing but simple common sense. I mean, remember how he was dumped on for that comment? It doesn't seem all that crazy anymore. Anyway, they also like his common sense business comments. Can't be bought. Says things, a lot of things that people think ought to be said, but no one else says. People love it. And they love the way he takes on Hillary Clinton when she goes war on women, and he's the one guy that points out, wait a minute, your husband was a serial abuser in the classic definition of workplace abuse, and you did everything you can to smear all the people who were making the accusations. And you're talking about me being bad in that regard? You know, she doesn't talk a lot about that much anymore. They also love the way he's doesn't give anything about political correctness. For example, he doesn't care what the New York Times says about him. So many conservatives hate the media. They love that part. They just love it when a bunch of media dorks are wetting their pants because of some of his comments. I mean, everybody loves it, the way he just, if you attack him, he always escalates. He never backs down. People like that. They're tired of being pushed around by the media and others. So they like that he's a tough guy. They think that will translate into keeping us safe instead of weak political correct policies in foreign affairs. They like that he's strong and bold. He's boorish. He can be rude, calls people names. You know what? His supporters, they don't care. I don't think they even care about some of his past positions as far as being kind of liberal on everything from Obamacare to a lot of other stuff. They just want a tough guy in there. And also, something else I've noticed about Donald Trump, you ought to watch him when he gives one of his speeches if it's ever on cable. He's actually pretty good. He's kind of a natural. He's also clever in a comic way. He's very funny. Anyway, the political establishment wasn't smart enough to think of a tagline called "Make America Great Again." I think that was pretty brilliant myself. Or "Take America Back." So I think he has a decent chance of being the nominee. What about the Democratic primary? Well, at first it was a coronation for Hillary, but that's not quite working out. We're on plan B for her right now. So I'd say, who knows? Hillary is a candidate. Not very good, honestly. She's kind of a wooden, she's a kind of a poor retail candidate. Here's Peggy Noonan again. She is especially poor at the podium, where when she wants to emphasize an applause line, her voice becomes loud, flat, and harassing to the ear. She lately reminds me of the landlady yelling up the stairs that your kids left their bikes on the hall again. I thought that was pretty good. Anyway, she's just not that good a campaigner, but she's got plenty of other problems too. She doesn't have a reputation as a person of integrity, way upside down on the polls on that. She's not likable, way upside down on the polls on that. And of course her scandals. We already talked about the women issue, and that's already hurting her with women, by the way, that the comeback by Donald Trump. Her polling numbers have gone down a little bit in that regard. The emails, particularly the classified ones, read something recently that if it had been anybody but her, she'd already be indicted. I mean, that's David Petraeus, remember, one time. John Deutsch, one time. 1,300, you kidding me? So we'll see where that goes. And the whole Clinton Foundation nexus, and frankly, another thing that Bernie Sanders is starting to nail her on a little bit is hypocrisy. For example, bashing Wall Street, and yet from 2013 to 2015, she gave 12 speeches. You want to know what her income was from those? $2,935,000. She had better 2 years than I did. Anyway, the polls show her losing to Rubio, Cruz, and even Trump. So her big competition now, of course, is Bernie Sanders, the socialist. Kind of shows me where the Democratic Party has moved, that an avowed socialist is now possibly going to win that nomination. And if you'll listen to him, it's all taxes, redistribution, class warfare, etc. He's doing real well with young people, no doubt taught at universities that socialism is so much better than capitalism. And he's doing well, anyway, he's surging, he's doing well with liberals, obviously. So right now, the truth is, this party, at least the nominating portion, is the party of Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts, rather than Bill Clinton's moderate Democratic Party, such as it was. Okay, New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders is going to win that primary, I think. Iowa, I think Bernie may very well win that. So the Midwest and Southern states are Hillary's hopes for a firewall where there are more minority voters, more moderates, etc., and she can hang on and win that nomination. I guarantee you there's a whole bunch of people in the party that are worried sick right now that she may not make it. So I'll give Hillary a slight tilt to become the nominee. But there's a chance that that's frankly not going to happen. Who knows? There may be an emergency call to Joe Biden or somebody like that. I don't know. But right now, good old Bernie's doing pretty well, and she's not. Okay, general election campaign. Some depends on who the nominees are. Reality check for the Republicans. It looks so easy, right? Remember that? Should be automatically winning based on those facts I talked about early on. Well, not really. Remember, it wasn't that much different in 2012, and Romney was profiled as the worst person in the world. Obama came across as a nice guy, but not that great a president. Who do you think people voted for? The nice guy who's not all that great, or the worst guy in the whole world? And well, of course, they voted for Obama. Then you have the mainstream media. I call them the media wing of the Democratic Party. Marco Rubio calls them a super PAC for the Dems. If you have any doubt about their influence, all you had to do was look at the debate put on by CNBC and watch their hostile and snarky questions to the Republican candidates, the gotchas and snarky stuff. But Democrats don't get that. So don't expect even-handed coverage for this election season. A huge problem for the Republicans is the Electoral College. It's pretty well stacked in favor of the Democratic Party. That's reason number 3. I would say that the Democrats could run Daffy Duck for president and still get 220 electoral votes. Just, brush him up a little bit and he'd still win. And that's just because there are several big states that are pretty much a lock for the Democrats. You remember, you only need 271. Republicans probably have about a solid 180. So they're starting behind, way behind. And it's not that far to the finish line for the Democrats. So they'll have to win a whole bunch of these, the Republicans will have to win a whole bunch of swing states to make it work. And finally, another big problem for the Republican Party that's been sneaking up on them for quite a while is demographics. The white vote, it was 84% of the electorate in 1980. This year it's going to be 70%. 14% that was really good territory for Republicans is now gone. And yet, I don't see that much outreach by Republicans to minorities, young people, millennials, et cetera, Hispanics, et cetera. Might need to get 40% of the Hispanics to win that race, and yet Romney got all of 27%. So if you're pursuing a whites-only party approach, you're probably going to lose. You probably deserve to. So by no means do all those bad facts I cited indicate to me that we're heading for a Republican victory. On the other hand, there is the other side, the history. Holding the presidency for the 3rd term, it's only happened once from 1950 till today, and that was 1988 when we had, after Reagan, we had George H.W. Bush as basically Reagan's 3rd term. That's the only time. Nobody's been able to do it 3 times in a row. So history isn't helpful. Obama's approval rating is about 44% in December. That's always bad if it's that low. 73% of Americans say the trend is in the wrong direction. That tells me people are open to change. If somebody talks that way, maybe they'll have a chance. If the global economic slowdown becomes a recession here, which is 50-50 in my view, that would add more outlook for change. And frankly, I'll just say it, I think the Democratic Party has a whole bunch of fairly extreme positions that is going to saddle the Democratic nominee, everything on tax increases, redistribution, foreign affairs, and on and on and on. And so I look at that as possibly a factor we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, what about what should the Democrat nominee do? Well, what should the Democrats do, or what are they likely to do? Well, they'll probably point out Donald Trump, if he's the nominee, his liberal past positions and his rude statements, et cetera, et cetera. He has real problems. He has a 35% favorable, 57% unfavorable on just in general, and he has a 36-59% negative on he cares about people like you. That's where Obama killed Romney. Sound bites from the primary season, all the fratricide, you can bet there'll be a lot of choice sound bites that'll be unearthed. Of course, now that the Democratic twosome's going at it, why I'm sure there'll be the same there. And President Obama will, in fact, do his best to bring out minority voters. There'll be a total lack of decorum by this president, I can assure you, to try to get them to come out and vote. He's not on the ballot, so they want to try to get that out. They'll also make the claim that Republican policies gave us the Great Recession. And do you really want to give power back to them? Now, I happen to know that's not true, but the Republican nominee better have a pretty good answer to that, because you're going to hear it. And if they're caught flat-footed, then I'd say shame on them. Now, what about the Republican nominee? What are they likely to do? What should they do? Well, I would ask the old Ronald Reagan question. Are you better off after 7 years than you were before? You really? You think you're better off? You want more of the same? I'd ask that question. I'd say it might be the economy, stupid. Remember that one? That was Bill Clinton. Are you really better off in that regard? All you have to do is cite the statistics I talked about earlier. Something else, and I think we're okay on this one. I'm so tired of Republican nominees that can't talk, especially on capitalism versus collectivism or socialism. Can't you have somebody that has the brains to talk about which one works and which one doesn't, instead of standing there tongue-tied? I think our top three can do all that, but please be able to talk about that. Don't be afraid to call out the media. They're on the other side. It's okay to say, I'm running against this guy, but I'm also running against those guys back there with the pens and the paper. People love it, actually. Another thing that should help the Republicans, and that's what I call the global disorder that's growing around the world. Do we really want to trust a Democratic president and the Democratic Party with the conduct of foreign affairs and foreign policy or terrorism? And I can guarantee you, everybody knows this is the last year of President Obama's presidency. We got a bad year coming. I can just feel it. There are going to be some bad things happening this year, and that'll add fuel to the fire if people are smart enough to do that. Another thing that the nominee ought to do, if they have any brains, is do an outreach to younger people, single women, minorities, et cetera, millennials. Millennials are actually kind of libertarian in their outlook if you actually poll them. Why not be smart enough to try to get them to come your way? Stay on the offense, because I really believe that about the only way the Democrats can win this thing is like 4 years ago, and that's utterly trashing the nominee. It's going to be, you're going to think this person should be renamed Mussolini if you let him get away with it, whoever the nominee is, with a complicit media. It's okay also. I'm almost done. Colin, can you hold it?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. It's okay to run on gun rights, Guantanamo Bay closing, crime, law and order, the anti-police rhetoric from the other side, the class warfare we've hearing, lawless executive actions. It's okay to run on all that. A lot of people get that, particularly on crime. And if they do the war on women, I would assume that people will be smart enough to do what Donald Trump did. That's Hillary's conduct when Bill was president. Something we don't talk about very much, but it's still the greatest gift of all. That's Obamacare. It's polling worse and worse, and it's slowly cratering. And it was one party's deal. It was not both. So if they're so dumb they don't talk about that, then shame on them. I think, and I felt this way for a long time. You about to kick me out of here? No. Okay. I felt for a long time that Republicans are making a big mistake by not having outreach to African Americans or other minorities. Now think about it. They've been voting for one party for a long, long time. Look around the country and see what they've gotten for that. Why not go to their enclaves, I hate to use that, that's not the right word, their neighborhoods, their forums, and say, how about some school choice so your kids can be educated better? I'm telling you, I get mad about this, and you can probably tell. I'm mad about this kind of stuff. Push school choice, lower taxes, fewer regulations, like Jack Kemp used to say, empowerment zones. Give an uplifting message to get people off of welfare and a chance in life. And I really, I'm pretty upset with the Republican Party for not doing much in that regard. The opportunity's there, and frankly, it's morally the right thing to do. So the opportunity's there. That leads into the next one. There ought to be a plan for economic growth. Some sort of program that they talk about where we get away from failed government programs and keep people dependent, and be able to talk eloquently on this, like some people always used to be able to do, and be able to answer the charges that Republicans. Another thing, better be able to answer the charges the Republicans caused the Great Recession. It's not true, but it's going to be said. You better be ready for it. Finally, an observation: if the media and the Democrats say that the nominee is running a dirty campaign, keep it up. You're doing the right thing. That's a great sign. So that's my observation on that one. Stuff that could happen, a little unusual. Could we really get to a convention where there'll be no first ballot winner? Hadn't happened in a long time, but it could. Third party, do you think the Republican Party could split this year? Establishment, usurpers? Could be. Not likely, but could be. Can the Republican establishment and base coexist after this, or is it going to split? I guess that's what I just said. Can the establishment hang on after in 2016? Another thing, wait till the votes come in. It's amazing how little you can trust polls anymore. It's just so hard to poll anymore, between landlines and cell phones, sampling, who's going to vote, who's not, et cetera. And if Hillary Clinton craters, we may see Joe Biden, we may see Al Gore, we might even see John Kerry. Who knows? That should be interesting. Will Trump, as nominee, drag down others, including the Senate, lose the Senate? The establishment says yes. I don't know. They've been wrong about so many things. The polls say that he would lose badly. Then again, I remember a guy named Ronald Reagan back in 1978, 79, 1980. He was trashed. He was told that he was an extremist to bring us to war. He was a crazy man, a cowboy, out of control, crazy ideas. He did okay. So I don't know what would happen in that regard. The results of winning, finally, for the Republicans, if they do win this thing, unlike FDR, unlike Reagan, an amazing amount of President Obama's legacy, it's not bipartisan. Those other guys were. Instead, he's used executive orders, often illegal, regulations, agency actions. You can set those aside in 3 days if a new president. That's why it's so important to win, because he's done a lot of this stuff. He apparently is unable to deal with Congress and the Senate. He just can't do it. And so he's doing the other thing. So remember, the value of winning is in 3 days you set aside a lot of stuff that you and I think a lot of other people don't like. Okay, big question. Who's going to win this thing in November 2016? My answer is, based on all I just went over, how the hell would I know? Too hard to forecast. Sorry about that. Okay, questions?